The rain fell in a cold, relentless sheet, mingling with the silent tears tracing paths down Lily Anderson's cheeks. The funeral was over. The last handful of dirt had been tossed. She stood alone under a borrowed black umbrella, the scent of wet earth and lilies thick in the air, a funereal perfume that seemed to seep into her bones. Her father was gone. Later that day, in the quiet, dusty office of her family's lawyer, the second wave of devastation hit. Her father, a brilliant but trusting man, had left behind a mountain of debt, medical bills from his long illness and business loans from deals that had soured. "The bank will be foreclosing on the house, Lily," the lawyer said, his voice full of a gentle, weary pity. "I'm so sorry. You have 30 days. The house. The only home she had ever known, the place where every corner held a memory. It was all she had left of her parents, and now she was about to lose it. Alone, grieving, and on the verge of being homeless, she felt the world closing in on her. 2 days later, a knock echoed through her quiet, half-packed house. She opened the door to find a man who seemed entirely out of place in her world of cardboard boxes and quiet grief. He was tall, dressed in a suit so sharp and perfectly tailored it looked like armor. His face was handsome, but hard, with intense, piercing eyes that assessed her with a cool, unnerving detachment. She knew who he was, of course. Michael Whitmore, a legal titan, a corporate shark known for his ruthless efficiency and for never, ever losing. He did not offer condolences. He did not engage in small talk. His presence filled the doorway, radiating a cold, intimidating power. "Miss Anderson," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that was completely devoid of emotion. "I understand you are in a difficult position." She stared at him, a mixture of confusion and resentment bubbling up. "If you're here to offer legal services, Mr. Whitmore, I can't afford you." A flicker of something, not amusement, but cold calculation, passed through his eyes. "I'm not here to offer my services," he said. "I'm here to make a proposal." He stepped inside, uninvited, his gaze sweeping over the boxes, the quiet desperation of the room. "I will settle every cent of your father's debt," he stated, the words so direct, so shocking, they hung in the air between them. "I will save this house. You will lose nothing." The offer was a sudden, blinding light in her darkness, a lifeline she couldn't comprehend. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through her grief. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you do that?" He turned his full, intense gaze on her. "In exchange," he said, his voice dropping, becoming a quiet, devastating command, "you will marry me." The world tilted. The air rushed from her lungs. She stared at him, at this powerful, handsome stranger who had just offered her salvation at the price of her own life. She was about to scream, to laugh, to slam the door in his face. "Why?" she managed to choke out, the word a raw plea for reason in a world that had just stopped making sense. He looked at her, his eyes as cold and impenetrable as a vault. "That," he said, "is not your concern." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting her desperation build. "But there is one condition." The words hung in the air, a silent, suffocating weight. One condition. Lily stared at him, her mind reeling, her initial shock giving way to a defiant, protective anger. "What condition?" she asked, her voice sharp, suspicious. Michael didn't flinch. He remained a statue of cool, controlled power, his face unreadable. He began to outline the terms of their contract with the same detached precision he would use in a courtroom. "It will be a marriage in name only," he explained, his voice a low, even monotone. "A partnership for a period of 6 months. You will move into my penthouse. We will attend a handful of essential corporate and social events together. In public, we will present a united front. In private," he paused, his gaze sweeping over her, "we will live entirely separate lives." The contrast between the public performance and the private reality was a chasm. She would be his wife, but also a stranger under his roof. "And the condition?" she pressed, needing to know the final, terrible price of her salvation. He took a step closer, and the clean, sharp scent of his expensive aftershave, something woody, like cedar and cold air, filled her senses. It was a scent of power, of a world she didn't belong to. "The condition is this," he said, his voice dropping, becoming a quiet, intense whisper that was more intimidating than any shout. "There will be no emotional involvement, no sentiment, no romance." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers, the command absolute. "And above all, no intimacy. We are business partners, Miss Anderson. Nothing more. If you break this rule, if any emotional or physical line is crossed, our agreement is terminated, the debts will be reinstated. You will lose this house. You will lose everything." It was the most monstrous, inhuman, and diabolical clause she could have ever imagined. He wasn't just demanding a fake marriage. He was demanding a marriage devoid of all humanity, all warmth, all connection. He was demanding that she sell her life, but not her heart or her body. It was a prison of cold, hard rules. She looked at his handsome, unfeeling face and felt a wave of pure, unadulterated hatred. But then, the image of her father's face, the memory of his love for this house, the terror of being left with absolutely nothing, washed over her. She was trapped. She had no other move to make. With a tear of silent, bitter humiliation tracing a path down her cheek, she whispered the two words that would seal her fate. "I accept." Michael showed no emotion, no triumph, no satisfaction. He simply gave a curt, professional nod. He placed a thick, leather-bound folder on a stack of boxes. "The contract," he said. "My legal team has been thorough. Read it." He turned to leave. "My driver will be here to collect you tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock. Be ready." He walked out the door without a backward glance, leaving her alone in the quiet, half-packed house, with the cold, heavy weight of the contract that would sell the next 6 months of her life to a man who demanded everything from her, except her heart. Lily arrived at Michael's penthouse at precisely 9 o'clock the next morning. The private elevator opened directly into a space that took her breath away. It was a vast 2-story apartment of glass and polished concrete, with a panoramic view of the entire city. It was magnificent, minimalist, and as cold and impersonal as a modern art museum. There were no photographs on the walls, no books on the shelves, no sign that a human being actually lived there. It was the fortress of a man who refused to feel. She was greeted not by Michael, but by his housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a severe, rail-thin woman with her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her expression was as starched and unforgiving as her uniform. "Welcome, Mrs. Whitmore," she said, the name sounding foreign and absurd. She looked Lily up and down, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on Lily's simple single suitcase. "I will show you to your suite." The suite was in the east wing of the penthouse, a beautiful but sterile set of rooms that were, as promised, on the opposite side of the apartment from Michael's master suite. The physical and emotional distance was clearly defined. "Mr. Whitmore has arranged for a wardrobe to be provided," Mrs. Gable said, opening a door to reveal a walk-in closet filled with designer clothes, shoes, and handbags, all in Lily's size. It was another cold, efficient transaction. That first night, sleep was impossible. The silence of the penthouse was a living, breathing entity, pressing in on her. She felt like a ghost in someone else's life. Restless, she slipped out of bed, needing a glass of water, needing to move. She padded barefoot through the dark, silent halls, the city lights outside casting long, geometric shadows on the polished floors. As she entered the main living area, she froze. He was there. Michael stood in the darkness, in front of the massive, floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was looking out at the city he owned. He had taken off his suit jacket, and his tie was loosened, the top buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. In the dim, ambient light, he didn't look like the ruthless lawyer from the contract. He looked like a man haunted by something she couldn't see. His attention was fixed on a single silver-framed photograph he held in his other hand. He must have sensed her presence, a subtle shift in the air, because he startled. He quickly, almost guiltily, placed the photograph face down on a nearby table before she could get a clear look at the woman's face. "Insomnia?" he asked, his voice a low, hoarse rasp, completely different from the cold, clipped tone he had used before. "Just thirsty," she whispered, her heart pounding. He turned to face her, his expression once again a mask of cool, unreadable control. The moment of vulnerability was gone. "Remember the rules, Miss Anderson," he said, his voice a quiet, firm reminder. The use of her maiden name was deliberate, a reinforcement of the wall between them. "Maintain your distance." He then turned and walked back toward his wing of the penthouse, leaving her alone in the darkness. But it was too late. She had seen the crack in his armor. She had seen the ghost that haunted his fortress of ice. And her curiosity, a dangerous, unwelcome emotion, began to take root. Their first public appearance as a married couple was a high-stakes shareholder dinner for Michael's law firm. It was a nest of corporate vipers, a room filled with men and women who measured worth in stock prices and leveraged buyouts. "Smile," Michael murmured as they stepped out of the car, the camera flashes exploding around them. He placed a hand on the small of her back, the touch formal, cold as ice, but undeniably possessive. "You are now a Whitmore. Act like it." Lily played her part to perfection. Dressed in an elegant, understated gown provided by Michael's stylist, she was the picture of quiet grace and intelligence. She navigated the treacherous social waters with a skill that surprised even herself, her conversations polite, her smile unwavering. The true test came when Michael's mother, a formidable woman with eyes as sharp and cold as her son's, cornered Lily by the bar. "So, Mrs. Whitmore began, her voice a low, condescending purr as she looked Lily up and down. "You're the girl who saved the family home. A sentimental purchase, I suppose. My son has his charitable impulses." The insult was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to remind Lily of her place as a transaction. Before Lily could respond, another voice, slick with malice, joined the conversation. It was Connor Hale, Michael's biggest corporate rival. "Well, well, Whitmore," Hale sneered, appearing at Michael's side but directing his words at the women. "I see you've finally made an acquisition in the domestic market. Tell me," he said, turning his lecherous gaze on Lily, "what was the closing price on this one?" The crude public humiliation made the air crackle. Lily felt the blood drain from her face. Michael, who had been across the room, turned. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He moved with a silent, deadly calm, his presence cutting through the crowd. He stopped beside Lily, placing a protective hand on her arm. He didn't look at his mother. He looked directly at Connor Hale. "My wife," he said, his voice a lethal, quiet whisper that was somehow louder than any shout, "is worth more than your entire portfolio, Hale. I suggest you remember that." He then turned his gaze to his mother, his eyes chips of ice. "And as for my charitable impulses," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "I am simply protecting my most valuable asset." The double meaning was clear. He was playing his part, protecting the investment of their contract. But the raw, possessive fury in his eyes, the way his hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Lily's arm, that was not part of the deal. That was real. He leaned down to Lily, his lips brushing her ear. "Shall we go?" he murmured. He guided her away, leaving his stunned mother and a pale, defeated Connor Hale in their wake. In the silent ride back to the penthouse, Lily broke the silence. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "It was part of the agreement," he said coolly, "protecting the investment." But Lily had seen the truth. She had seen the way his hand had clenched on the steering wheel. the knuckles white. It wasn't about the investment. It was about her. And that realization was more confusing and more dangerous than any clause in their contract. A week later, their duties took them to a high-profile charity art auction. The grand hall was filled with the city's cultural elite, a world Lily had only ever dreamed of. As a former art history student, she felt a pang of longing as she moved past magnificent sculptures and breathtaking canvases. She forgot for a moment that she was playing a part. She became lost in the art, her eyes shining with a genuine passion that Michael, standing silently by her side, had never seen before. She stopped in front of a small, unassuming landscape painting by an emerging artist. It was a moody, atmospheric piece, a quiet storm captured on canvas. She was completely captivated. "It's beautiful," she whispered, more to herself than to him. As she was studying the brushwork, a young, handsome man with a charming smile approached her. "It's a wonderful piece, isn't it?" he said, his voice warm and engaging. "The artist has a fantastic sense of light." He introduced himself as James, a philanthropist and a member of the museum's junior board. They fell into an easy, animated conversation about art, their shared passion creating an instant, natural chemistry. They laughed at a shared opinion, their heads close together as they discussed the artist's technique. Michael watched from a few feet away. He stood perfectly still, a glass of champagne in his hand, his face an unreadable mask. But a muscle was feathering in his jaw, a tiny, telltale sign of a rising, irrational irritation. He watched the easy way James smiled at Lily, the way her face lit up as she talked, and he felt a cold, unfamiliar knot tighten in his gut. When the landscape painting came up for auction, James immediately raised his paddle. "A fine choice," he said to Lily with a wink. But then, from across the room, a new bidder emerged, an anonymous buyer, represented by one of the auction house's staff on the phone. The price began to climb. James would bid, and the anonymous buyer would instantly counter, driving the price higher and higher. The bidding war became the spectacle of the evening. James, caught up in the competition and clearly trying to impress Lily, kept raising his paddle. Finally, the anonymous buyer on the phone made a final, astronomical bid, a number so high it silenced the entire room. "Sold!" the auctioneer cried, his gavel falling with a sharp crack. James turned to Lily with a disappointed shrug. "Well, it seems someone wanted it more than I did." A few minutes later, an assistant from the auction house approached Michael, holding a beautifully wrapped package. "Your acquisition, Mr. Whitmore," the assistant said quietly. Lily stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. He was the anonymous buyer. "Why?" she whispered, completely stunned. "I don't like to lose," he replied, his voice cool, detached. But as James approached them to offer his congratulations, Michael stepped forward, placing a firm, possessive hand on the small of Lily's back. "I believe our evening is over," he said, his voice a low, dismissive growl directed not at Lily, but at James. He guided her out of the grand hall, his grip on her back unwavering. Lily was speechless. She looked back at James's confused face and then at Michael's hard, stony profile. She realized, with a sudden, thrilling jolt, that this had nothing to do with not wanting to lose the painting. It was about not wanting to lose her to another man. The following weekend, Michael was required to attend a family gathering at his mother's sprawling country estate. As his wife, Lily's presence was non-negotiable. The house was beautiful, a classic stone manor surrounded by autumn foliage, but the atmosphere inside was as cold and biting as the November wind. Michael's mother, Eleanor, greeted them with a smile that was all teeth. She treated Lily with a polite, icy disdain, making it clear she saw her as a temporary and distasteful arrangement. But during the weekend, away from the city and the pressures of his firm, Lily saw another side of Michael. She saw him walking in the woods with a scruffy, old golden retriever he had rescued years ago, his voice soft and gentle as he spoke to the dog. She saw him in the library, his face animated with a rare passion as he described the history of the estate, a place his own mother had loved. The cracks in his armor were widening, revealing glimpses of the man beneath. The fragile peace was shattered on Saturday night. They were in the grand living room having pre-dinner drinks with the family when there was a knock at the door. A moment later, a woman walked in. She was tall, elegant, and stunningly beautiful, with the kind of effortless confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege. Lily recognized her instantly from the photograph Michael kept hidden in his study. "Michael, darling," the woman exclaimed, her voice a melody of warm, familiar affection. "I heard you were in town, and I just had to stop by and say hello." It was Dr. Evelyn Carrington, Michael's ex-fiancée. She swept into the room, completely ignoring Lily's presence. She kissed Michael's mother on the cheek, laughed at a joke his uncle made, and then turned her full, dazzling attention to Michael. "It's been too long," she said, placing a familiar hand on his arm. "We must catch up." The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with a shared history that Lily was not a part of. Evelyn and Michael's family began to reminisce about old times, about shared vacations and inside jokes. Their conversation a seamless, exclusive club. Lily sat on the sofa, a glass of untouched wine in her hand, feeling completely, utterly invisible. She was an outsider, a ghost at their family reunion. And Michael was trapped. He stood stiffly beside Evelyn, caught between the woman from his past and the woman who was his complicated present. He would glance at Lily, a flicker of something, guilt, apology, in his eyes, but he did nothing. He didn't introduce her. He didn't include her. He just let her fade into the background. The pain was a sharp, physical ache in Lily's chest. It was one thing to be ignored by his mother. It was another thing entirely to be rendered invisible by him. She had told herself this was a business deal, that her heart was not involved. But seeing him with Evelyn, seeing the easy, familiar connection they shared, she was forced to confront a devastating truth. She had lied to herself. She had fallen in love with her cold, complicated, contractual husband. With a quiet grace she didn't feel, she stood up. The conversation faltered for a moment as all eyes turned to her. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a soft, steady whisper that belied the storm raging inside her. "I think I need some air." She turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and into the cold, dark night, leaving Michael standing there, his face a mask of conflict and dawning, horrified realization. Lily walked blindly into the manicured gardens, the cold night air a welcome shock against her heated skin. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away. The laughter from the house, the sound of their shared history, felt like a physical blow. A light drizzle began to fall, cold and persistent, but she barely noticed. The pain of seeing Michael with Evelyn, of realizing her own foolishness in falling for him, was a storm inside her that drowned out everything else. The tears she had been holding back finally came, hot and silent, mingling with the cold rain on her cheeks. She heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. Lily. It was Michael. He stood a few feet away, his suit jacket now soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked as miserable as she felt. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice rough. "You'll get sick." "What does it matter?" she retorted, her voice choked with a pain she could no longer hide. "I'm just part of a contract, aren't I? Your debt to be paid." The word debt hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, his face paling. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "No one had to," she cried, finally turning to face him, the rain plastering her dress to her skin. "I'm not stupid, Michael. I know this has something to do with my father. This whole charade, this marriage. It's all because you feel like you owe him something, isn't it? Now tell me the truth." Pressed, cornered, and seeing the raw, genuine pain in her eyes, he finally broke. He couldn't tell her the whole truth, the truth about the scandal that could still ruin her family's name. But he couldn't lie to her anymore. Yes, he confessed, the word a ragged admission in the pouring rain. Your father, he made me promise. He made me promise I would take care of you. The confession, though she had suspected it, was devastating. It confirmed her worst fears. She wasn't a partner. She wasn't even a business asset. She was an obligation, a burden, a promise he was fulfilling against his will. So that's all I am to you, she whispered, her heart shattering into a million pieces. A promise? A duty you're begrudgingly fulfilling? Before he could explain, before he could tell her the why, she pushed him away. I don't want your charity, she screamed, her voice raw with heartbreak. I don't want your protection. I want to go home. She turned and ran, stumbling blindly through the rain, away from him, away from the house, away from the man who had just confirmed that their entire relationship was built on a foundation of pity and obligation. He watched her go, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, torn between the need to run after her and the promise he had made to her father, a promise that had just destroyed the one real thing in his life. Michael didn't hesitate. He ran after her. The promise he had made to her father was important, but the thought of her disappearing into the dark, rainy night, alone and heartbroken, was unbearable. He caught up to her on the long, private road that led away from the estate, grabbing her arm gently to stop her. The rain was a torrential downpour now, soaking them both to the bone, plastering his shirt to his chest and her hair to her face. You can't go, Lily, he said, his voice a desperate plea over the sound of the storm. Not like this. Let go of me, she cried, trying to pull her arm away, but his grip was firm. I'm done, Michael. I'm done being your project, your good deed. You're not a good deed, he shouted back, his own control finally snapping. You're a complication. You're the most illogical, infuriating, and completely captivating variable that has ever entered my life. Give me one reason to stay, she screamed, her face wet with rain and tears, her eyes blazing with a pain so profound it cut him to the core. One real reason. Not a promise to a dead man. Not a debt. A real reason, Michael. He stared at her, his mind racing. He was a man of words, a lawyer who could argue his way out of any corner. But in that moment, faced with her raw, desperate demand for a truth he couldn't give, and a feeling he couldn't explain, he was utterly, completely speechless. He couldn't tell her about the scandal, about the true depth of his debt to her father. He couldn't break that promise. But he couldn't lie to her anymore. So, in an act of pure, unadulterated desperation, he did the only thing he could. He pulled her to him, his hands tangling in her wet hair, and he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, passionate, and furious kiss. It was a kiss that broke every rule, every clause, every cold, logical boundary he had ever set for himself. It was a kiss that poured out all his frustration, all his fear, all his jealousy, and all the undeniable, terrifying love he felt for her. It was a confession, made not with words, but with a raw, desperate hunger. For a split second, she resisted, her hands pushing against his chest. But then, she surrendered. Her own arms wrapped around his neck, and she kissed him back with an equal, heartbreaking ferocity, pouring all of her own pain, her own confusion, and her own impossible love into the embrace. The kiss left them both breathless, clinging to each other in the pouring rain. The rule was broken. The contract was in ruins. And now what? She whispered, her voice a trembling, hopeful question against his lips. He looked down at her, the rain streaming down their faces, his eyes dark with an emotion he could no longer deny. I don't know, he answered, his voice a raw, honest rasp. And for the first time, not knowing was the most honest and most hopeful answer he could have ever given. They returned to the country house, drenched, silent, and fundamentally changed. The air between them was no longer cold or tense. It was charged with the electric, terrifying energy of a truth that had finally been unleashed. Evelyn and Michael's mother were waiting in the grand foyer, their faces masks of disapproval. They saw the way Michael and Lily entered together, their clothes soaked, their eyes locked on each other, and they knew, instantly, that something had shifted. The game had changed. The next morning, Michael, with a calm and quiet finality, asked Evelyn to leave. "Things have changed, Evelyn," was all he said. She left in a fury of wounded pride. His mother was next. "You're choosing her?" she demanded, her voice incredulous. "A girl with no name, no connections, over your family's reputation? Have you gone mad?" "Perhaps," Michael replied, his voice steady. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel sane." But it was Lily who made the final move. Later that day, she found Michael in the library. He looked lost, as if he had just set fire to his own world and wasn't sure what to do next. "I'm leaving, Michael," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Panic flashed in his eyes. "No, Lily, wait. We can figure this out. I chose you." "No," she corrected gently. "You broke a rule in a moment of desperation. That's not a choice. It's a reaction." She took a deep breath, taking control of the situation, of her own life, for the first time. "Our contract is broken. The terms are void. I'm going home." She saw the devastation on his face, and her heart ached, but she held her ground. "You need to figure out what you really want, Michael. Not what you feel in a rainstorm, not what you feel when you're jealous. You need to figure out if you want me, or if you just don't want to be alone." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "And when you figure it out," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength, "you know where to find me." She walked out, leaving him standing alone in the silent library. She had taken the power back. The choice was no longer his to make by default. It was hers to accept, but only if he was willing to fight for it for real. And now, he was completely, utterly, on his own. Lily's departure was a quiet, devastating amputation. Michael returned to his penthouse, but the space, once his sanctuary of control, was now a cold, empty tomb. Her absence was a physical presence, a constant aching reminder of what he had lost. He tried to work, but his focus was gone. He would find himself staring at the empty chair in his study, remembering the way she had looked at him with such fierce intelligence. He would walk past the music room and almost hear the echo of a melody she had played. He realized, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that she was right. He had kissed her out of desperation, out of a chaotic storm of emotions he couldn't control. But what did he feel now, in the quiet, lonely aftermath? He loved her. It wasn't a complicated, tortured feeling like his memories of Evelyn. It wasn't a duty or an obligation. It was a simple, profound, and terrifying truth. He loved her intelligence, her strength, her quiet dignity. He loved the way she challenged him, the way she saw through his armor. He was a better man when he was with her, and he had let her walk away. He knew he couldn't go to her with just words. She didn't trust his words, and he couldn't blame her. He needed to offer her the one thing he had held back, the one thing that was at the very heart of their entire arrangement, the full truth. He went to his safe and pulled out a sealed, yellowed envelope. It was a letter his own father had written to him years ago, a letter he had been instructed to open only in a dire emergency. He knew instinctively that this was that emergency. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was not a legal document, but a handwritten confession from Lily's father, addressed to Michael's father, dated just weeks after the scandal that had almost ruined Michael's career. He read the letter, and the final, missing pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with devastating force. The scandal had been a setup. A rival firm, led by Connor Hale, had framed Michael for insider trading. The evidence was damning, and Michael's career was on the verge of being destroyed. Lily's father, who was Michael's mentor, and one of the few honorable men on the board, had discovered the truth. But Hale had leverage over him, threatening to expose a minor, unrelated mistake from William's past that would have ruined him and his family. William Anderson had made a choice. He had sacrificed his own reputation to save Michael's. He had taken the fall for the scandal, quietly resigning from the board in disgrace, his name tarnished, on the condition that Hale would drop the charges against Michael and destroy the evidence. And he had made Michael's father swear one thing, that Michael would never know the truth, so he would never feel the weight of that debt, and that if anything ever happened to him, they would ensure his daughter, Lily, was taken care of. Michael sank into his chair, the letter clutched in his hand. His entire life, his entire career, had been built on the foundation of a sacrifice he never knew had been made. His debt to Lily's father wasn't just about gratitude. It was about honor. Her father had given him back his future, and now he finally understood. He couldn't just offer Lily a life of comfort. He had to give her back the one thing her father had lost in saving him: his honor. Armed with the truth, Michael knew what he had to do. But first, he had to see Lily. He drove to her small, quiet house, the house he had saved, the house that now felt like a world away. He found her in the garden, tending to her mother's old rose bushes. She looked up as he approached, her expression guarded, wary. He didn't make excuses. He didn't plead. He simply handed her the letter. "I think you deserve to know the real reason," he said quietly. She read the letter, her eyes widening with every line. She saw the truth of her father's sacrifice, the depth of his honor, the real reason for Michael's debt. The story was so much bigger, so much more profound than she had ever imagined. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face. She looked up at him, her heart a tangled mess of grief for her father's hidden sacrifice and a new, overwhelming love for the man who had carried this burden in secret. "I need time, Michael," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I need to think." He nodded, his own eyes full of a painful understanding. "I know," he said. "Take all the time you need." He turned to leave, giving her the space she had asked for. The next few days were agony for Michael. He had laid his entire soul bare, and now he could only wait. Meanwhile, Lily was at a crossroads. She understood his motivations, the honor that had driven him. But she was also hurt by the years of secrets, by the cold, clinical contract that had been born from them. It was then that Connor Hale, seeing Michael's public vulnerability and sensing an opportunity, made his move. He approached Lily through a mutual acquaintance, offering her help. "Michael Whitmore has a history of using people," Hale said to her over coffee, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "He used you. He used your father." "I have information, documents that could expose his firm's more aggressive business practices. Together we could make him pay." He slid a folder across the table. It was filled with documents that, while not illegal, were certainly unethical, painting a picture of Michael as a ruthless corporate predator. It was a chance for revenge. The chance to destroy the man who had, however unintentionally, built his empire on the ashes of her father's reputation. Lily stared at the folder. She had the power to ruin him. She thought of the cold, arrogant man who had first walked into her house. She thought of the pain and humiliation she had felt. But then, she thought of the man who had sat with her in the dark conservatory, the man who had been jealous at an art auction, the man who had kissed her in the rain, the man who had just, finally, shown her the truth. She looked up at Connor Hale, her eyes clear and cold. "No," she said. She stood up, leaving the folder on the table. "My father was an honorable man," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she hadn't felt in years. "And he believed in Michael Whitmore, and so do I." She walked out of the cafe, leaving a stunned Connor Hale behind. She had made her choice. She was not a victim seeking revenge. She was a partner, and she was about to go to war for the man she loved. Lily didn't just walk away from Connor Hale's offer. She ran toward a solution. She didn't go home. She didn't call a friend. She took a taxi straight back to the one place that now felt like the center of her universe, Michael's penthouse. She arrived unannounced, using the key he had given her. He was in his study, staring out the window, looking like a king who had lost his kingdom. He turned as she entered, his face a mask of weary surprise. "I'm not here to give you an answer about us," she said, her voice firm as she walked past him into the vast living room. "I'm here because we have a problem." She laid the folder on his coffee table. "Connor Hale is trying to destroy you," she stated, her voice ringing with a new, fierce energy. "And he tried to use me to do it." Michael looked from the folder to her face, a slow, dawning understanding in his eyes. She hadn't just chosen him over his rival. She had chosen to stand with him in a war. She had brought him the enemy's battle plans. "My father believed in you," she said, her gaze unwavering, powerful. "He sacrificed his name to save your career. I will not stand by and let another man tarnish that legacy with lies." In that moment, Michael saw her not just as the woman he loved, but as his partner, his equal, a warrior with a will as strong and as unyielding as his own. He knew with a clarity that cut through all his grief and self-loathing that words were no longer enough. He had to act. He had to prove, not just to her, but to the world, that he was worthy of her father's sacrifice and her loyalty. The next day, he called an emergency press conference. The news sent the financial world into a frenzy. The room was packed with reporters, camera crews, and industry analysts, all of them hungry for a statement, expecting him to announce his resignation, or, at the very least, the end of his scandalous marriage to save his company. He walked to the podium, a picture of calm, controlled power. He looked out at the sea of faces, the flashing lights, the digital recorders held up like weapons. He took a deep breath. "I've called you here today," he began, his voice clear and commanding, silencing the room instantly, "to right a wrong that has stood for over a decade." He didn't speak of stock prices or market shares. In front of the entire world, he told a story. He told them about a brilliant, honorable man named William Anderson, his mentor, a man of integrity in a world that had none. He told them about the corporate sabotage that had threatened to destroy his own career years ago. And then, his voice cracking with an emotion he no longer tried to hide, he told them how William had sacrificed his own reputation, taking the fall in secret to save a young, promising lawyer he believed in. He didn't just tell them, he showed them. On the massive screen behind him, he projected copies of the documents from his father's letter, irrefutable proof of William Anderson's innocence and the conspiracy that had ruined him. He cleared his name, not in a quiet legal filing, but in the court of public opinion, with the entire world as his witness. He then turned his attention to the present. "The man behind that original conspiracy, Connor Hale," he announced, his voice turning to ice, "is once again attempting to manipulate the market and destroy my company by attacking the character of the people I love. But this time," he said, his gaze finding a specific camera lens, as if he were speaking directly to Hale, "he will not succeed. The evidence of his past and present crimes has been turned over to the authorities." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the city. He finished his speech by looking directly into the main camera, his expression softening, his voice becoming personal, vulnerable. He knew Lily was watching. "I have spent years trying to repay a debt of honor in secret," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I built my life on rules and control to protect myself from a world I saw as corrupt. But I have learned from a woman of incredible strength and integrity that some truths must be brought into the light. That the greatest strength is not in building walls, but in having the courage to be vulnerable." He took a deep breath, his heart in his eyes. "My greatest honor is not in my business successes. It is in trying to be a man worthy of the legacy of William Anderson and of the love of his daughter." He had not only cleared her father's name, he had not only destroyed his enemy, He had laid his own heart, his own failures, and his own love bare for the entire world to see. He had risked everything, not for a business deal, but for honor. For her. The press conference sent shockwaves through the city. The story was explosive. The public redemption of William Anderson's name, the exposure of Connor Hale's long-buried crimes, and the stunning, vulnerable declaration of Michael Whitmore's love and loyalty. Lily watched it all from the small living room of her father's house, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He had done it. He had risked everything. He had torn down the walls of his own carefully constructed world, not with anger or arrogance, but with the quiet, devastating power of the truth. He had done it to honor her father. He had done it for her. That evening, as dusk settled over the quiet neighborhood, a familiar black car pulled up to the curb. Michael got out. He didn't walk to the door with the confidence of a CEO or the authority of a lawyer. He walked with the hesitant, uncertain steps of a man who had laid his entire soul bare and was now waiting for the verdict. He didn't knock. He simply stood on her doorstep, waiting, giving her the power to open the door or to leave it closed forever. She opened it. They stood in silence for a long moment, the space between them filled with a universe of unspoken words. He looked tired, the strain of the past few days etched on his face, but the cold, hard mask he used to wear was gone, replaced by an open, raw vulnerability. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," she whispered finally, her voice thick with emotion. "It was the only thing that mattered," he replied, his own voice raw. Righting that wrong, honoring him. He looked at her, his eyes full of a painful sincerity. "And hoping, just hoping, that I could prove to you that I could be a man worthy of his sacrifice." She stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in, Michael." They didn't sit in the formal living room. She led him to the small, cozy den at the back of the house, the room where her father used to read for hours. They sat in two old, comfortable armchairs, a small table between them, the ghosts of their past, finally, truly, laid to rest. They talked for hours. It was not the tense, strategic conversation of their contract or the desperate, emotional pleas of their last encounters. It was a quiet, honest, and sometimes painful unraveling of two lives that had been secretly intertwined for years. He told her about the guilt he had carried, the feeling of living a life that had been bought at the price of her father's honor. "Every success I had felt tainted," he confessed, his gaze fixed on his hands. "It felt like it belonged to him, not to me. And I couldn't even say his name. I couldn't thank him." She, in turn, told him about her own quiet grief, about the years spent wondering what had really happened, about the anger she had felt toward a world that had seemed so unjust. "I spent so long hating you," she admitted, a sad smile on her lips. "It was easier to hate the man who took everything than to face the fact that everything was just gone." "I did take everything," he said, his voice full of self-loathing. "I took your home, your life, your freedom. I put you in a cage and called it a contract." "No," she said, leaning forward, her voice firm. "You gave me a chance to fight back. You gave me the tools. You were just too blind to see that I was never going to be a pawn in your game." He looked up at her, a flicker of his old admiring smile returning. "You were always 10 steps ahead of me, weren't you?" "Always," she confirmed, her own smile matching his. The conversation shifted, becoming softer, more personal. They talked about their dreams, the ones they had confessed in hushed tones in his cold mansion. Her dream of studying art, his dream of building something that healed instead of just conquered. Finally, a comfortable, profound silence settled between them. "I love you, Lily," he said, his voice now clear, steady, and full of a quiet, unwavering certainty. "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. I know the damage I've done. But I have to ask." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her heart stopped. But he didn't open it. Instead, he placed it on the table between them and pulled out something else. A single, antique-looking key. "This is the key to this house," he said softly. "The deed is cleared. It's yours. Completely. No strings, no contracts, no debts. It's your home." He pushed the key across the table toward her. "And this," he said, tapping the velvet box, "is a question. Not a demand, not a condition." He looked at her, his entire soul in his eyes. "I want you to have your freedom, Lily. The freedom to choose. But I hope, more than I have ever hoped for anything, that you will choose to let me be a part of your life. Not because of a promise, not because of a debt, but because you want to." He stood up, his movements slow, deliberate. "The choice is yours, completely." He turned to leave, to give her the space, the freedom he had just promised. "Michael, wait," she said, her voice stopping him at the door. He turned, his face a mask of hopeful, terrified anticipation. She looked at the key to her past, then at the velvet box that held a possible future. "I don't want you to move into my life," she said, and she saw the hope in his eyes begin to fade. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. "I want you to build a new one, with me." She stood up, walked over to him, and took his hand, lacing her fingers with his. The kiss they shared in the doorway of her father's house was not one of passion or of desperation. It was a kiss of homecoming, a kiss of a new beginning. The weeks following their reconciliation were a quiet, deliberate reconstruction of a love that had been built on a flawed foundation. They didn't rush back into the whirlwind of their old lives. Instead, they took their time, building something new, something real, brick by brick. Michael, true to his word, gave Lily her space. He didn't move into her house, but he became a constant, gentle presence in her life. He would show up at her door not with extravagant gifts, but with 2 cups of coffee in the morning, or with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant after a long day. They spent their evenings not in tense silence, but in easy conversation, rediscovering each other without the weight of secrets and contracts. The final hurdle, they both knew, was his mother. Eleanor Whitmore had been conspicuously silent since the press conference. She had not called, had not sent a message. One Sunday, Michael arrived at Lily's house, a nervous, uncharacteristic tension in his shoulders. "My mother has requested our presence for lunch," he said, his voice tight. "You don't have to go. We can say no." Lily looked at him, at the man who could face down corporate raiders without flinching, but was terrified of his own mother. She took his hand. "No," she said, her voice calm and steady. "We'll go. Together." The lunch at the Sinclair estate was a cold, formal affair. Eleanor was polite, but her disapproval was a tangible force, a wall of ice around the dining table. She spoke of business, of society events, of everything except the woman sitting at her table. After the meal, as they were having coffee in the drawing room, Lily decided she had had enough of the silent war. "Mrs. Whitmore," she began, her voice clear and respectful, causing both Michael and his mother to look at her in surprise. "I know that I am not the woman you would have chosen for your son." Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "That is an understatement, my dear." "And I know," Lily continued, her gaze unwavering, "that our story began in a way that was unconventional and even wrong. But I need you to know one thing. I love your son. I love the man he is and the man he is trying to become. And he makes me happy. Truly happy." She paused, letting her words settle in the quiet room. "I'm not asking for your approval. That is something I must earn. I am simply asking you to see the happiness of your own son. Isn't that, in the end, all that matters?" Eleanor stared at her for a long, silent moment. She looked at her son, at the way he was looking at Lily, his expression full of a love and an admiration she had never seen in him before. She saw not a cold, calculating CEO, but a man who was, for the first time, truly, completely alive. The ice in the matriarch's eyes began to thaw. A slow, reluctant smile touched her lips. She reached across the table and picked up a small, ornate box from the mantelpiece. She opened it and took out a pair of beautiful, antique sapphire earrings. "These belong to Michael's grandmother," Eleanor said, her voice softer now, the hard edge gone. She held them out to Lily. "She was also a woman who fought for what she wanted. She would have liked you." She placed the earrings in Lily's hand. "Welcome to the family, my dear." The blessing, so hard-won, was a profound, healing moment. Later that week, Michael surprised Lily with another proposal. He took her to a large, empty, light-filled loft space in the city's arts district. "What is this place?" she asked, looking around at the vast, open room. "It's our new headquarters," he said, a proud smile on his face. He handed her a leather-bound portfolio. Inside, it was not a contract, but a detailed business plan. "The Anderson Whitmore Foundation," she read from the cover page. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice full of a new shared excitement, "about what you said, about building something that heals. This foundation will be dedicated to funding arts education programs in underprivileged schools. It will provide scholarships for young, struggling artists. It will be a legacy in your father's name, using my resources and your passion." He looked at her, his eyes shining. "I don't want to be your boss, Lily, and I don't want to be just your husband. I want to be your partner in everything." She looked at him, at this incredible man who was offering her not just his heart, but a shared purpose, a shared dream. She was not just marrying into his world, they were building a new one together. "I think," she said, a brilliant, happy smile on her face, "that's the best proposal I've ever heard." The day of their real wedding was nothing like the cold, transactional affair in the judge's chambers. It was a small, intimate ceremony held in the backyard of the house that had once been her father's, the very home Michael had saved for her. The garden, which she had spent the last year lovingly restoring, was in full bloom, the air filled with the sweet, familiar scent of her mother's favorite roses. There were no reporters, no business associates. The guests were a small, tightly knit group, Lily's closest friends, Michael's mother Eleanor, looking genuinely happy, and a handful of board members from the new Anderson Whitmore Foundation. Lily didn't wear a designer gown. She wore a simple, elegant dress of her own design, one that was both modern and timeless. As she walked down the grassy aisle on the arm of a close family friend, her eyes were fixed on one person. Michael stood under a simple archway of white roses, and the sight of him made her heart ache with a love so profound it was almost painful. He was not the cold, armored CEO she had first met. He was just Michael, his face open, his eyes shining with an adoration that was meant only for her. They had written their own vows, promises that held the weight of their entire complicated journey. "Lily," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide, as he took her hands in his. "The first time I met you, I saw you as a solution to a problem, a means to an end. I have never been more wrong in my entire life." He squeezed her hands. "You were not the solution. You were the truth. You taught me that a life built on control is a prison, and that true strength isn't in avoiding pain, but in having the courage to feel, to love, to risk everything for what truly matters. I promise to spend every day of my life honoring the sacrifice your father made and trying to be a man worthy of the incredible love you have shown me. I love you." When it was her turn, Lily looked into the eyes of the man who had seen her at her lowest and had chosen to lift her up. "Michael," she said, her voice clear and steady, filled with a quiet, joyful certainty. "I met you when my world was falling apart, and I saw you as the man who had caused it, the enemy. But you were not the storm. You were the shelter. You taught me that my past does not have to define my future, and that the greatest strength is in learning to trust again. You saw me when I felt invisible, and you gave me back my voice. I promise to always see the man behind the armor, to be your partner in building a life of purpose, and to never, ever give up on you. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the kiss they shared was a quiet, profound testament to their journey. It was a kiss of healing, of partnership, of a love that had been forged in the fires of lies and had emerged stronger, purer, and unbreakable. Later, during the small, intimate reception in the garden, as the sun began to set and lanterns cast a warm, golden glow over the happy guests, Michael pulled her aside. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, a familiar, mischievous glint in his eye. He led her to a small, quiet corner of the garden. On an easel, draped in a silk cloth, was a painting. He gently pulled the cloth away. It was the small, moody landscape painting from the art auction, the one she had fallen in love with, the one he had bought out of jealousy. "I didn't buy it because I didn't want to lose to James," he confessed, his voice a low, soft murmur. "I bought it because it was the first time I ever saw your eyes truly light up. It was the first time I saw the real you, the woman who loved art more than money, the woman I was already, without knowing it, beginning to fall in love with." He turned to her, his expression serious, full of a love that was bottomless. "I knew, in that moment, that I would do anything to see you look that happy for the rest of your life." Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face. It was the most romantic, most meaningful gift he could have ever given her. It was a symbol of their entire story, a journey that had started with a transaction and had ended with a masterpiece. "Our 6-month contract is over," she teased gently through her happy tears. "Yes," he whispered, pulling her into his arms and kissing her softly under the twilight sky. "Now the lifetime contract begins. And the only condition," he murmured against her lips, "is that you never ever leave me." "Deal," she whispered back. And they sealed their final, most important agreement with a kiss that promised forever.